we're the Eliminators, and we're going to talk about Jackson's early life, the formation of the democratic system, and the second party system. My name is Tiffany Wadika.
And I'm Karina Garza.
I'm Alondra Perez.
And I'm Cheyenne Tucker.
Our first part is Andrew Jackson's early life.
Andrew Jackson, the 7th U.S. President, born in March of 1767, died June 8, 1845, from lead poisoning from a leftover bullet, which was an inch away from his heart.
He was born in Waxhaw Settlement. He was born in between North and South Carolina. Many people say, he doesn't really have a birthplace since he was born in the middle, but he considered himself as a South Carolina native. Yeah.
His dad died before he was born, and his mother was widowed.
His mom and brothers moved in with her Crawford relatives. He then attended local schools, receiving an elementary education and perhaps a smattering of higher learning.
During the American Revolution, the Declaration of Independence was signed when he was 9 years old. At 13 years old, he joined the Continental Army as a courier. Andrew had two brothers, Hugh, who died from a heart stroke, and Robert. 2 years later, Andrew and his brother Robert were taken prison for a few weeks in April of 1781. Jackson and his brother were imprisoned together and contracted smallpox.
Okay, Jackson refused to clean an officer's boots, and the officer slashed him with the sword, leaving him with a scar on his forehead and left hand.
Jackson's mother went to tend the wounded American prisoners and fatally died from cholera.
Okay, and in case you were wondering what cholera is, it's an infectious and often fatal bacterial disease of the small intestine, typically contracted from infected water supplies and causing severe vomiting and diarrhea.
At the age of 17, his goal was to become a lawyer. He worked as a clerk for a lawyer in Salisbury, North Carolina. That way he could have enough access to law books.
In 1787, he was accepted to serve as public prosecutor in Numero District of North Carolina. And in 1788, he built his own legal practice, got into trading ventures, and acquired land and slaves.
At the age of 15, Jackson was left orphaned, so he was living with relatives and neighbors all while finishing school. Jackson was dueled 3 times. The first one was Jackson versus Avery. Both of them decided not to shoot each other, so it was going to be even. The second one was Jackson versus Governor Sevier. The reason for that duel was Sevier accused Jackson for adultery due to the problems he had with the divorce with his wife. The third one was Jackson versus Dickinson, which Dickinson died and Jackson was struck by a bullet that later caused him health problems. Andrew's wife, Rachel Donaldson, was not legally divorced, but didn't know until 2 years into marriage with Andrew Jackson. Later, the problem was solved and they remarried. They adopted adopted 11 children, 2 of them who were Native American.
Alright, and the names of these kids were, well, they go in order from who they belonged to before their parents passed away. Okay, so, let's see. An orphaned nephew of Rachel, they took him in. He lived through 1817 to 1817, so he died as a kid. This was John Samuel Dawson and his brother, born 1801, died 1863, Daniel Smith Donaldson, and then 1799 through 1871, Andrew Jackson Donaldson. Okay, and this is an orphaned grandnephew of Rachel. He was born in 1812, died in 1841. His name was Andrew Jackson Hutchings. Orphaned children of family friend Edward Butler, so they took him in. They have no birth date or death date. Edward Butler, Anthony Butler, Alyssa Butler, Caroline Butler, and also the 2 adopted Creek Indians, Theodore Jackson, which he has no birthday or death date, and Lincolnia Jackson, born in 1811 and died in 1828, and she died of tuberculosis. Also, there's Andrew Jackson Jr., who was born in 1808 and died in 1865. Alright, so in 1795, he became a delegate to the State Constitutional Convention. He then became Tennessee's first congressman, then a senator. A year later, he resigned because he wanted to go closer to home, and he became judge of Tennessee's Superior Court. In 1802, he challenged Governor John Seaver for Major General in command of the state militia. Jackson won.
While he was in command, while leading a group, he was given the name of Hickory, and that name stuck since then. His army named him that. The reason for that is because of his aggressiveness and toughness. He was also known as a national hero for winning War of 1812, which was the Battle of New Orleans.
Okay, I will now talk about the formation of the Democratic Party. I'm going to go back to the beginning and talk about the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist. First, we have the Federalists. They had a very loose interpretation of the Constitution. They wanted a strong, centralized government. They were made up of the wealthy and well-educated people. A couple of their proponents were George Washington and Benjamin Franklin. And opposing them were the Anti-Federalists. This party was made up of farmers, debtors, and other lower-class citizens. They stood for individual rights and states' rights, and they had a very strict interpretation on the Constitution. Their proponents were Samuel Adams and Patrick Henry. And after that, the Anti-Federalist party switched and is now the Democratic Republicans. So we have the Federalists versus the Democratic Republicans. And first, the Democratic Republicans, their loyalty was with France. They were farmers, so they didn't want a very industrialized economy or anything, and whereas the Federalists, their loyalty was Great Britain and in Great Britain, they were starting to industrialize their economy, so the Federalists wanted to work towards that and have an industrialized economy. After the Republican victory in 1800, that was the end of the Federalist Party, and it dissolved in 1830. So after that, you have the Democratic Republicans, basically, throughout the era of good feelings and all that. But within the Democratic Republicans, you have some people that still have Federalist views. They're just mixed in with the Democratic Republicans. So the Democratic Republicans ended up splitting, and you have the National Rights Republicans, which will later on become the Whigs, and you have the States' Rights Republicans, which are the Democrats. So the Democratic Party is the oldest political party. It was formed in 1792 by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. It was first called the Republicans and then later the Democratic Republicans. When Andrew Jackson lost in 1824, Jackson supporters created their own organization to get him elected. So basically, for the election of 1824, you had Andrew Jackson, John Quincy Adams, Henry Clay, William Crawford. And although Andrew Jackson had the most votes, he didn't have the majority. So the House of Representatives would vote for who they wanted out of the top three candidates, which would have been Andrew Jackson, John Quincy Adams, and William Crawford. And Henry Clay, he was actually the Speaker of the House, so he was the deciding vote to pick who he wanted to be president. So him and Adams made a deal, so Adams ended up becoming president. So Adams' followers became the Whigs, and then after the election in 1828, when Jackson won the presidency, the organization that supported him became known as the Democratic Party.
All right. A little bit more of what she said, a little bit more background on the Federalists and Anti-Federalists and the Democratic Republican Party. When the Constitution was about to be ratified, there were two separate groups. There were the Federalists, which were for the ratification of the Constitution, and the Anti-Federalists were against the Constitution. The Anti-Federalists were kind of dissolved after the Constitution was ratified, and then a little after they evolved into the Democratic Republicans, and which was run by Jefferson, and they were against the Federalists, which were run by Hamilton. The Democratic Republicans were very strict on the Constitution. They were made of they tried to protect the agriculture because Europe was becoming more industrialized, and they would have to buy raw goods and food from someone. And so Jefferson thought it would be better to keep our economy up by staying agricultural. Meanwhile, Hamilton, who protected the businesses and manufacturers, wanted to industrialize the economy more and took a loose interpretation of the Constitution. These two butted heads for basically till they died. The first party system kind of dissolved. The Democratic Republicans lose power in Congress, and the Federalists take over. Then the Federalists kind of dissolve with them in 1812, and so the Democrats come back, but the Federalists, who had kind of dissolved, had merged their way into it, like she said, and so they split into those two new parties. The Democratic Republicans turned into the States' Rights Republicans and support Andrew Jackson, who then evolved into the Democratic Party. The other was the National Rights Republicans, who support John Quincy Adams and the Whigs. The differences between the Whigs and the Democrats. The Whigs support John Quincy Adams. They believe Jackson was a tyrant, that he was too frontiersman kind of, and too hardened to truly understand the civilized science of politics. And they protected like the cities, the manufacturers, and the businesses, and they wanted an industrialized economy. And they were basically made just to get rid of Jackson. Like this party didn't really appear until Jackson like started his campaigning, and the Democrats supported Andrew Jackson, and they believe that the common man should have as much say in politics as the well-educated and elite should. They believed in equal rights for white men, not for the Native Americans or slaves. And it protected the agricultural side of it. The Whigs win the election in 1824 with John Quincy Adams because of the complications in the election and the corrupt bargain, as Jackson would later call the deal between Quincy Adams and Henry Clay. And this party lasts until Jackson takes office it lasts a little after he takes office until 1834, and it evolves into the Republican Party along with other groups such as the abolitionists and others. When Jackson finally got to the White House, he wins in 1828 by campaigning along with the common man and aiding certain groups of people such as in the battles of New Orleans and giving the white frontiers families the Indian land. And many political leaders were very apprehensive about how popular and how coarse Jackson's presidency could be, because on his inauguration day, a mob swarmed Jackson to congratulate him. So they were kind of really cautious about how much power he could have just from his popularity. And that's it.
We have some fun facts here. So, number 1, Jackson had a giant flock of cheese in the White House. At the end of his term in 1837, he let the public eat the giant cheddar cheese. It stunk the house up for 2 days. Number 2, Jackson beat up his assassin. He was leaving a funeral when this man came up and I guess he started telling him things, and he pulled out a gun and misfired the first time, and then it misfired. I mean, he took out another gun. Right?
Yeah.
And he misfired also. So I mean, he got really lucky those 2 times.
And then he started beating the man as he was getting arrested with his cane.
Yeah.
And then just one more interesting fact that we thought was interesting was that Jackson, he hated the monetary system, like paper money, and it's just very ironic that he's on the $20 bill because he was
Truly
not
hated the banks.
Yes, he was not for that at all.
Yeah, he didn't.
And that was it.
That's it.